Good, John. How are you doing?
Very, very good, very good. Plunging
I'm s-
through retirement.
Yeah, no, I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're really enjoying it.
I warned my agent the other day that if I wanted a good holiday, give her a ring and do a movie. No,
Is is that something up on the horizon, you think?
no, no. But I realise now that the way things are going with the digital revolution,
Yeah.
the cameraman doesn't really spend a lot of time now on set. I found on the last film with the digital cameras, you spend a lot of the time in the dit tent, just sitting there eating donuts and drinking coffee. So that's why I said if I want a holiday, I'll go back to work.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that now, right? Because there was that, what you just said, there was that, and then there's all this new AI stuff that's happening, right? And the strike and how those things are unfolding. I mean, if anything, the animation division, like, people who are full-time animators, they're the way things are going, they might be out of work in the next 4 or 5 years, maybe even earlier.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think anybody really has the answer because the
Yeah,
answers, we're still asking the questions. So while that's going on, you're not going to know the answer. It'll just evolve, I think.
yeah, I think so too. But good to have you back, John. Really enjoyed my conversation with you about the English Patient. And I saw Mosquito Coast after a long time. I had actually completely forgotten the film. And maybe at the time I didn't understand. Well, it's a very deep film, right? I mean, it's just literally about, in my opinion, Harrison Ford's best performance.
Ah,
Um,
great.
yeah, and how it sort of deals with power and what happens when power gets to your head and what, at a very small scale, but that's how things start. So totally love the film, love the cinematography, and that's why I wanted to chat with you. That how did you come on board? Was it your first film with Peter Weir, or was it something else that you had worked on before? I mean, you guys are both Australian, so that was probably the biggest commonality.
Yeah. Oh no, it wasn't my first film. I'd worked with Peter in Australia a lot. Actually, I was camera operator for the great Russell Boyd, who photographed three of Peter's early Australian films, um, Picnic at Hanging Rock, Last Wave, and Gallipoli.
Mm,
And I was very lucky to be asked by the both of them to be camera operator. And then later, due to conflicting schedules and whatnot, um, Peter asked me to go to Belize to shoot the Mosquito Coast, and it was the first film overseas for me. Um, but unfortunately, we went over to Belize and we went through LA and we picked up all the camera gear, electric scripts, and the gaffer and I from Australia went over there and did that. But unfortunately, it crashed, and we were given a ticket and sent home straight away. And so I thought that was the end of it.
mm,
But I think it was only about 6 or 8 weeks later, Peter rang and said, "Look, I've got another film to do in America. Are you available?" And I had a few commercials and things lined up. Nothing big. There wasn't much movie industry in Australia, so I was doing commercials, and I said, "Look, yes, I am. I can cancel those." And he said, "Well, it's a cop film set in Philadelphia with Harrison Ford." And I gulped and thought, with Harrison Ford at that stage, Harrison was and obviously still is a top box office man, and
mm.
I went over there and we did Witness, and I think it was out of the success of Witness that the studios felt they would then back Mosquito Coast with Harrison in it. So that's how it did a sort of a turnaround of collapsing at 1 minute, do another film that interests people in America, and then going back and being able to do the original film.
Right. Witness was a fantastic film, but I would sort of sway away from that for now for another day. Uh, but Mosquito Coast, I mean, it it how much time, how big was your crew um for that film, especially, which is where with the majority of the film takes place, in the jungle? How big was your crew? What kind of difficulties you guys had? How was it easy adjusting to the climate, the bugs?
I think, to be honest, I took a lot of Australians in
Hmm.
because I wanted that security uh, of mind, that I had a crew that I'd worked with before in Australia. And I was treating Witness, in fact, and Mosquito Coast, those early American films, as Australian films. I did have a little bit of a fall about on Witness with this uh, uh, Camera Grip Electric's crew. In fact, the whole crew were from the east coast of America, and they're noisy. They're a noisy mob. They really are. Um, and I had this very lovely focus puller from New York, since passed away very sadly, um, Bruce McCullum, and had been shooting for a week on that, and I he said something to me about how I lit it. Why didn't you do this?
Mm.
And I thought, oh, gee, maybe I'm doing this wrong. And but Peter, being a very astute man with people, characters, and personalities, I think he pinged to it, and he just said to me, Johnny, he said, don't worry about anything with the crew. This is an Australian film. You and I are doing it. It's just that all of the rest of the crew have a funny accent. Otherwise, it's an Australian film. And that set me straight on Witness. So when I went into Mosquito Coast, I was a little more au fait with the East Coast, but we were going to shoot, pretty well all of the film in Belize. And I knew that Australians were very good travellers, workers and travellers. They don't complain too much about food or accommodation. It's whatever they is the best that the company can offer is good enough. So I thought, no, they'll be more robust in Belize, because Belize was a really tough little place.
Hmm.
Um, People got beaten up going to anywhere by themselves. We never walked alone. You always had two or three of you. It was a tough little place, and I knew the Australians could handle themselves. Some of them a little too well, actually, but so I took Australians in, and of course that comfort zone made the whole exercise of shooting in Belize very much easier, I think, and I hope for Peter and myself. So, it changed capacity when Harrison came on board, because the original film that we set off to make before Witness didn't have Harrison. Harrison came on board because of Witness. So we suddenly had a good friendly face there as well, and also somebody who had also, I always felt he was more Australian with a funny accent than not. He lived on a lovely, luxurious ship, which was by virtue of the company, because he's our star, our actor that needs to keep the film rolling. So we've got to look after him health-wise, food-wise, water-wise. The ship had its own desalinators, had chefs on board. The food was carefully checked. We all got sick with food in Belize. As I said, it's a tough little place to shoot.
Yeah.
But Harrison was looked after very well. But he blazed into the jungle. I mean, he's a great man and a great actor in that role. And I think he enjoyed that role of being somebody who's very prepared to buck society at that time. And I think Paul Theroux's brilliant novel, I loved it when I read it. I thought it was fantastic, and it was a needed novel at that time. And I believe Peter felt the same, enough to do the film. So I think all in all, everything converged onto that film, using, say, Witness as an interim exploratory film into the cruise and Harrison, and then being able to put Mosquito Coast together, I think was very beneficial actually in the long run.
Yeah, it was just one of those films with Harrison Ford where he literally took charge from the opening scene. I mean, he does that in most of his roles, if not all, but it was just something so unique. Like, we've seen him as Indiana Jones, we have seen him as Han Solo. I forget the name of the character in The Fugitive, and also in Witness, like all these characters, but this was just like he was just so full of himself. Like the way Peter directed him and he acted, the script was you are with him as you empathize with him, but then as the film takes a shape, you start, at least for me, I couldn't stand him. Like I started disliking him because of the way because of the choice, but the choices and decisions that he was making, but that confidence level that he had. I mean, he just led everybody, like, in, to even his, like, even to the last, I think it was the second last, just before the last act, when they get onto the beach, I literally thought, because I wasn't sure how many minutes of the movie was left, I was so into it, I thought that this is almost over. And then he tells the kids that there has been a nuclear holocaust and everybody's convinced. I'm like, wow, this guy's like so, such conviction. Um, and I was talking to Richard Francis, who kind of came in at the end for just a little bit of editing. I was talking to him about Mad Max, and he said to me, and he didn't remember what it was. He said to me there was a lot more that was shot in USA that gave context to his decision of moving all of a sudden, because he does kind of the things kind of shift from US very quickly. Do you remember what that was, that the context of those scenes, if there was anything? That's what Richard was mentioning it.
No, as you know, with all films, you shoot a lot more 10-to-1
Yeah,
ratio in a way. So there's always surplus material for the editors and directors to play with in post. So it's a long time ago,
you can't
Joe, and
remember.
so um, I can't remember exactly what
No
scenes
worries.
might have been deleted, but there's always that surplus.
Yeah.
And it's I've always admired, especially Richard Francis Bruce. I mean, I did a lot of films with him in Australia, and I did a few overseas, internationally, um, over the years. And I've always loved the way he worked and thought and sussed out the edit of a movie on that 10-to-1 ratio or whatever the ratio might have been. I've always loved that. So I think with he and Peter in the editing room, they would have taken the bones out of obviously the material that we shot prior to them leaving for the coast, that Peter could get the essence of the character out of that. Sometimes a cameraman can be very disappointed as to what's cut out of a film.
Oh, for sure.
Because sometimes you think, oh, that lovely scene that was I thought was I shot it so beautifully, it's not in the movie. And I learned very early in the piece, though, on another film that if it doesn't make the film work, then you can't have it in the movie just because it looks lovely. So I didn't worry about anything that's not used. And but I've always, as I said, admired not only Rich, Francis and Bruce, but the combination of Peter Weir and Richard putting together a film as complex in its characters and its portrayal of those characters, and cutting it to exactly what they feel is the quantity of the presenting of those characters. I think in essence, I mean, I love that. I love the character fighting against society. I don't think a lot of people, maybe in America, did. America is a very materialistic place, and I think that the character wanted to be more independent of society. It's something I've always felt as well, in a way, that we're leaning a little bit too heavily on maybe government departments that would come and help us. My argument always is a little bit like the Ali Fox character is, why not be more independent within yourself? So I enjoyed this book immensely, and I enjoyed, crossed fingers that I was asked to help Peter make it, because I just loved the idea of that character trying to say to people, be more independent within a family, within yourself, to the problems that are going to occur in our society, and that way, I think you can survive as a family, which is what Ali Fox wanted to do. But at the time of that film, maybe a lot of people didn't appreciate what he was getting at. So I think it was very bold and brave of Peter and of Harrison, particularly, taking on a character such as that.
Yeah, and it was like, even though it was man versus society, but I also felt it was a man versus himself kind of a story where if he had any doubts, he would just cover them up or try to look at a bright side. And you're so right about the being independent, because, you know, the way the world is going, I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes or the next 50 years or 5 years. But if something does go down, I mean, COVID kind of showed that. How do you survive as an individual? Like, if you are dependent so much on the government with every little thing, how do you survive? Would you be able to survive on your own in a jungle? Kind of like Swiss Family Robinson tale, right? Or Robinson Crusoe. But yeah, no, Harrison was just phenomenal. Like I cannot stress that enough. I mean, I've pretty much seen every one of his film, and that to me was his standout performance. And you're right, I think it came out at the wrong time, because that sense of individuality, I think it would do really well now if it was to come out. And I think there's a series now out too on Apple TV. I haven't seen it. There's a new series out called The Mosquito Coast. But
Yeah.
how many days were you in the jungle? How many months or weeks? Or was it
Um,
continuous?
at the time, it always feels like a lifetime. I can't remember actually the exact schedule. It was a few months we were in Belize, and then up on the East Coast to Boston. I think we went to Boston to do the departure scene where he waves and says, "Goodbye, America, have a nice day," which is another line, I think, which upset probably a lot of people at the time. But the truth. But we're a few months in there, and as I said, Belize was a very tough place to work in lots of ways. There were a lot of factions down there that were
Mm-hmm.
quite interesting. A lot of people dropping out of society for a number of reasons. I remember you could buy a passport for $25,000 and become a Belizean overnight. which a lot of people, I think, were doing down there. We had a situation where we had to take the rigger, and I took a boat down to find a tin of paint, water-based paint, that had been thrown into the mangroves from a helicopter to get a spot for a tower, camera tower, to be built 60 feet high to get those final shots of the boat coming down the river and out to the ocean. And we were told, if we take the inland waterways down to that location, to be careful, don't stop, just go where you have to go, don't stop on the way or anything like that. And it was quite eerie, because we'd come round a corner and there'd be a house sitting up on the bank, and as we approached, windows had closed, doors would close as we went by, and it was, you'd look at it and you'd think, hang on, I don't know what's going on in there, but there's something going on in there. So it was a very, very tough place to work, and a lot of problems came out of it. You know, some of the crew would arrive, one of the crew might arrive in the morning with a black eye, and I'd say, what
Oh,
did you
wow.
do? Did you walk down to the bar by yourself? No, he said, 3 or 4 of us went down. But he said, once we got to the bar, he said, I went to the bathroom by myself. And they beat him up in the bar and took his money. So that happened a reasonable number of times. And we'd be sitting in the bar, and some Rastafarian would sidle up and say, hey, Mon, what do you want? I get you anything you want, anything. And you just knew that underneath all of that, there were anything you wanted to buy down there, you could buy in that bar of the Fort George Hotel. So it was, it was a fascinating place to work. And
I'm sure.
and I said, tough, but we got on with it.
Yeah, I would just make a comment about two things that I really loved from a cinematography standpoint. And you know, there were, I don't know if you've seen Mosquito Coast recently. There was two shots. One of them was when they're about to leave the house, and Helen Mirren's character looks at the kitchen, and you see all these dishes just, on pile on top of each other. And that visual said so much without ever saying a word. And then Harrison Ford's character, when he is contemplating about the decision to make that move, the camera sort of he's standing against the window, and the camera comes behind him, and he doesn't really turn around to get, you don't see his profile, but he's thinking and he's talking, and you get that sense from his point of view that he's actually thinking about something very important. And I thought those two things for me as a filmmaker just stood out so much, and I really wanted to make that comment that they just said so much without saying anything.
I think, to be honest, overall, through the work I did with Peter, was always very exciting,
Mm,
because Peter always made his film, and I really liked that in the early Australian days, when really we didn't. Those early Australian films were done on a more of a what if process. What if we do it here? What if we do it there? And by doing that, if you had a mad idea, we would do it, because there was nobody there to say, hey, you can't do it that way. You got to do it wide shot, medium shot, close up, otherwise the editor can't cut it, which is what
mm,
was pounded into us in the early days. But we did them, and a scene similar to that had occurred on Witness, where we set the camera up on a telephone booth with Harrison in the telephone booth, and he's ringing his office, and we were actually waiting for the link to come through on the phones, which is what you did in the old days, and the camera's rolling, because we weren't too sure exactly when the dialogue would come through on the phone, and Harrison would go into the dialogue. So the camera was rolling on the back of his head for a long time, and then you hear the voices. and all you hear is, that his partner's been killed, has died. And it was such a powerful thing to be on the back of somebody's head, watching them, listening inside their mind. And I think that sort of shot pervaded maybe into Mosquito Coast, that you could do a shot of the back of somebody's head and the audience was thinking along with them because that's what they were looking at. And I love that with Peter and on the films that we did, that he was quite prepared and happy to do those sort of shots and wanted to do them without any fear of the upper office storming down and saying, "Hey, you can't do that." So I love that way that we did that. It's very much like the look of the film, the overall look, which maybe, I don't know, you have a question with, but at the same time they were shooting the mission film in Africa, and I checked everything out, of course. Chris Mengi's one of the best cameramen the world's ever seen, was shooting on Agfa, I believe, because Agfa was a beautiful negative.
I remember Agfa.
Yeah, and it just loved greens and made them look so lovely. But when we tested all three negatives, Peter didn't want to go for that. He didn't want Ali Fox's jungle to be a pretty jungle that everybody would love to go to. He wanted if I remember, it was a black, greasy jungle where nobody wanted to go into because of that blackness, that greasiness, that colourless olive drab green colour, that only Ali Fox could see the beauty in that jungle, dragging his family along behind him. So that we selected then Fuji negative, which it didn't like the greens anywhere near as much. It did bring on a drab olive green. And so we shot the film on Fuji for that reason. And I loved it because the Fuji was a very fast stock back then, and I used a high-speed negative for the whole film. And so that kept a nice constant colour grade, and it also kept a nice constant grain structure, because back then the high-speed negatives had a nice grain in them, which we don't get anymore with digital, which is very sad. So all of those preconceived ideas in pre-production came to bear on the final result of the film. And I think people did feel that what the heck is Ali Fox thinking? How can he think this jungle's beautiful? It's as ugly as heck, So all of that was part of, I think, building the character of Ali Fox to control the film.
I'm glad you talked about the look, because that was going to be my next question. And it is so true that, nowadays, like I don't know if you've ever seen Swiss Family Robinson, the Walt Disney one in the 1960s. It wasn't like a dark film, right? But they're stranded on an island, and it was way more saturated than Mosquito Coast. Mind you, it was made 20 or 25 years before. And that's one thing I loved about the look. It wasn't like, it wasn't black and white, of course, but it wasn't oversaturated, and it had that rawness, and especially the grain, the tint of the green that showed up on the film. I think the grain stood out more on that versus it may have been on a different look. I'm not sure if this is just my guess, but it was phenomenal. And going back to what you were talking about, shooting from the back, I think one thing is that it also makes the audience curious what kind of expression this person is having, right? And then you try to get into like what's going on. Like, it gets your attention, and you might think it's the other way around, but just not showing a face or the expression gets the audience right pulled in. But yeah, no, I just wanted to make that comment. I really, really enjoyed the cinematography of it, and the way the camera followed him in the jungle. Especially when they land on the island, the mayor of the city, right? Um, landed on the island, and they're just building from scratch. It was just so, well done in terms of seeing the jungle through his eyes, with the camera following him most of the time.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's where I'll reiterate again that working with Peter is such a delight, because he can see that, he feels it and can see that, putting the audience onto the beach, putting the audience into the jungle by virtue of the angles or the positioning of the camera. And it's very exciting working with directors like that really make that camera become. I mean, I think a big part of helping to make films in the cinematography side is, I've always felt that we need to suck the audience out of their seat, um, and float them through the virtual window of the screen
Mm-hmm.
into another world which we've created, and hold them there. And the only way to hold them there is to have good words, good performance to those words, camera angles, editing, sound, that is all what I always hoped and felt was natural to that script and geographical situation. So the audience were very comfortable with all of the statistics in front of them. So those visual statistics would happily blend in a continual form to keep them in the story. And that, sadly, if something jolted them out of that they would then back into their seat and start eating popcorn again. And you'd have to pick them up again and pull them back into the screen, back into the story. So I think with Peter particularly, I felt was very aware of that, and to keep the audience in the film all the time by virtue of all the tools he had was very important. And I think that the angles and suggestions of the shot to the audience were all part and parcel to lock that audience into the reality of that moment. So they were actually there living as an invisible observer, really, to this drama that's going on in the life there. I found that a fantastic teaching tool, in a way, to me, as a cameraman helping on those films, for my future. I was learning to try and always think of keeping the audience in the movie. And beautiful pictures didn't come into it. The reality came into it. The reality of photography, of image making, I felt was far more important. And I do lecture now to students that beautiful photography never helped a bad script. You have to
Yep.
have that script and then start working towards making that script a reality in their mind. And I think that's the wonderful challenge of filmmaking.
It's so true. And, one thing that has suffered in cinema, and by the way, your work in Mosquito Coast and English Patient, I see the similarities, but I see so many differences. And obviously it's because you learned your way through, but also sticking with the roots of what you learned on Mosquito Coast and Witness. But one thing, that uh, I probably start noticing in the last 4 or 5 years, is I used to appreciate editing a lot, right? Like, okay, where's what being cut at what timing and everything. But having watched so many films now from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, more often now than before, I realized that and this does not take away anything from cinematography or direction or script, how nowadays special effects, enormous special effects, unnecessary, non-practical special effects, and too many cuts, like TV style editing, takes you away from the story completely. Like it's just, I don't know if you have you seen Oppenheimer?
Not yet. I haven't caught it.
Uh,
No.
yeah. I'm a huge Christopher Nolan fan. I got sucked out of that movie in the next first 15 minutes because it was just so many cuts, and that to me, and a lot of other films too, is just like you just gotta hold on. And I know you have to do coverage, and I know there's sometimes you're forced to edit because something was not right in one take or the other coverage, but that's just something missing. And I find in Dunkirk it was there quite a bit. When I saw Saving Private Ryan just recently with my kids, I showed it them first time. I noticed how less of editing was there. Same thing with
Yeah.
English Patient, right? But you don't see that very often now, and I think that's one of the reasons, among many other audiences are not, they only care for like IPs like Super Mario, Ninja Turtles, or big superhero movies, because that's what they're getting, and I really
Yeah.
miss. And I've learned that too. Like I did my first film, I edited a lot. Like I cut between, and then I realized, no, then you got to stay with the character as much as possible if you can.
Mm-hmm. I think, Joe, and it's very difficult in a way. I've often nowadays doing when I'm asked to do some lectures with students, and there's a lot of
Sure.
them around now. Nobody
Yeah.
around when I started, but there's thousands of them now. And they all are looking for the secrets of cinematography or filmmaking or whatever, thinking they're secrets. And I have to try and say to them, there's no secrets.
Yeah.
It's the individual is making a film, and you become part of that individual. Um, but uh, over the years, some films suit longer shots in the edit, and
I
others,
get it.
like Mad Max, George went for a very fast, high-powered editing because he needed it to portray all of the action that was occurring between
Right.
the people.
I
So
wasn't
he kept.
referring to action films, just to clarify. Sorry. Go on.
Yes, no, but what I'm trying to get at is that the rhythm and pace, even within a film, can be a slower edit to speed up to pass through, a situation that's very vibrant, but then it can slow down again. But I do find that, and agree with you that a lot of films are overly fast paced for what seems to be the only reason is to create visual energy. And I think also I'm finding that a lot of camera work is so energized in handheld and unmotivated zooms in and out to sort of try and energize visually the scenes as well. And I agree with you that when you go back to watching films made by, say, Peter Weir that we're talking about on Mosquito, none of that came into it, and yet the power of the camera and the visuals during the presentation are all there for the audience to
Yeah.
be emoted by. They can, either feel frantic or cry or laugh. It's all there, and it doesn't need a lot of this sort of fake visual energy. So I'm trying to tell a lot of students that go make the film that the director wants to make of that script.
Yep.
Nothing else really, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, no, I
I've been
think
wrong a lot.
you're so right, and I'll tell you why. Because there's a couple of things that you learn over time. It's like they say, write what you know, right? Like write what you know. Number one, that's a key thing. Whether it's through your experiences or some historical references that you are very knowledgeable about, whatever that is. And I think the second thing is the editing and the camera work and all that becomes invisible, even if there are millions of cuts or camera is shaking or zooming in. If the characters and the script is great, I'll give you a great example. This just came out 6 months ago. Blackberry. There's a movie called Blackberry.
Oh yes,
On
I've read
on,
it.
on yeah, And it's I was actually speaking to the DP as a young guy. It's a Canadian movie, and I rarely watch Canadian films, but it was like a documentary the way they shot it. It had so many tight shots. It was cut so often. It was a camera was shaking, moving in and out, but it worked because it was such a strong, character-driven, intense, fast-paced, boom, 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 story that I didn't even like it. It bothered me in the first 5 minutes, but then I was so hooked, I didn't notice it. So I think
Yeah.
that's the thing. Whatever drives the story, like whatever story you're trying to tell, if you have the right marriage of camera, editing, lighting, direction, acting, characters, script blended in, it will work. But if you try to just find, oh, I need to get this cool shot, or I need to cut here just because I have to cut, or what it just, I think that's where everybody screws up. A lot of us. I mean, I have. I'm sure a lot of us do.
I think there's, in the past, they had all these lovely old philosophies of filmmaking from the pre-war, pre-Second World War, maybe that's what, that all the goodies go left to right and the baddies go right to left, and all of these sort of psychological reasonings for what the making of a film. In continuity or otherwise. But one of the ones that I always remembered and locked in, I felt, was the editing philosophy of you never see the perfect cut because it's what you wanted to happen did.
Yep.
And that, I always used to think about that. And when I was camera operating, because I so loved camera operating, I tried always to think about where will the cut be and try to anticipate it to the point so that the camera wasn't moving or it wasn't zooming in or out. It was ready for that perfect cut. I don't know whether it drove editors mad or what. I never did it as a big obvious thing, but it was always in my mind while I was operating that the shot's over, and I would have wanted to cut out a second and a half ago.
Yeah.
Things like that while you're operating. I can't ever say that I was right or wrong because it's too intricate to follow, but that was the thinking of thing. And that was the one that really stuck in my mind out of all those lovely old philosophies of filmmaking was that editing philosophy. And as I said, I tried to make it work as much as possible through the camera.
I think you hit the nail on the head because filmmaking itself, whether you're making a documentary or a narrative, whatever that is literally psychology.
Yeah,
It's literally about trying to get into the audience's head and how they would relate to it. And that comes with your gut feeling and writing what you know. And one thing that I sometimes it used to bother me, but again, with time, I've appreciated more. There'd be a scene where two characters are talking and you'll have like, over the shoulder or, for both. And then a shot will come where the camera will start dollying in on one character and, kind of like a soliloquy from a Shakespeare play. And it won't cut. And it used to bother me, like, why am I not getting the reaction of the other person, even though this person A is saying something important? But then it dawned on me that how this character was saying something so pivotal and emotional in the sense of the arc of the story that you don't want to take it away from them. And that, and
yeah,
again, it's case by case basis, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And it's that terrifying thing in editing when you're watching a movie and suddenly they cut away and you think, I wanted to see the end of that. To me, then the audience is out of the movie. You've got to then get them back into it because any comment, any criticism of structure coming through on that screen that destroys the 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 feeling of the film is detrimental totally. So I think a lot of it happens now more so than ever on the streamers. They're getting pretty wild, those streamers, I must say, with continuity and lighting and camera movement and stuff. It's pretty wild stuff out there.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if digital one day died in the current time, and like you can't do digital editing, you can't do digital cinematography, and the old way came. I wonder if that would change the mindset of the studios and the crew, because it's, it's costs money to have film and to process film. If that has anything to do with that, or partially at least. What do you think?
I think a lot of people ask me, would I be, would I have preferred to kept shooting on photochemical process? And I've got to say no.
Mm.
Those new cameras, uh, grip equipment, electric equipment. I was amazed on my last film, which was George's 3,000 Years of Longing. Um, I was amazed at what's on the marketplace now in
Oh, for
lighting, grips,
sure.
and camera. It is incredible. It's stuff of dreams of 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when we had cameras half the size of a Volkswagen and trying to handhold that, four of us trying to handhold a camera. But nowadays, too easy. You put it in the palm of your hand and just walk around with it, or you do a cutaway with an iPhone, and it can fit in. I mean, all of that stuff's incredible. So I don't feel I'd like to go back to photochemical, knowing that you've only got 1,000-foot load or a 400-foot load, and all of that sort of thing is a bit of the past. I think we now fly around in slinky jets, and the old propeller-driven aeroplanes are come and gone. Much that they're a fun thing to go in a propeller-driven aeroplane, you'd much rather go from Sydney to LA in a 787.
Yeah. No, don't get me wrong. I mean, you're right. You're right about digital. I mean, 95% of the stuff that I've done is digital. And of course, it's become so easy now. I don't know if you remember that big phenomenon that came in the late 90s, the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that movie cost them $15,000 to make. And I think it made like 500 million or something. And that was like one of the highest. It made 248 million in US, and it cost them $15,000 to make. And it was all literally, I think, a camcorder just walking around in jungles without
Yeah.
you ever seeing faces. And that just somehow clicked. And now every horror movie sort of follows that as a template, right? But yeah, I mean, I think it's what I meant to ask you was if the studios would be more like, would they take more chances with film versus digital? But I think you answered the question anyways, regardless. And
Well,
technology is wonderful.
I think the tools of trade are so advanced now in the digital revolution and LED revolution that it still doesn't mean, I feel, that directors have to use it in a very modern contemporary style. They could
Mm,
still shoot that lovely, quiet, sincere movie of the past on that same equipment. So I don't think, in a way, in my mind, that the tools of trade are actually controlling um, the type of film that's made. And I hope I'm right in
I think you
lecturing
are.
that. Well, I hope I'm right that it's the script. I mean, if the script it demands that kind of coverage to make it work for the director and what he or she will then hope will be the audience. Um, it doesn't matter what tools of trade you use; they can all be used any way or form that is needed for that particular story.
Yeah. I think you and I are pretty much dancing around the same thing. It all comes to the story, right? It's the bottom line is that it all comes to the story and what you're trying to tell and how you want to tell it, and not thinking about fancy shots or fancy cuts. But if the story requires that, then sure, if you want to shoot the Sahara, like Lawrence of Arabia by David Lean. Absolutely. But, just for the heck of it, I think that's where, and the secret sauce that you students talk about. And I think what the problem that has become now, and this is not everybody, is that everybody wants to hit that level of fame, right? Like I want to get that fame or recognition, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think the target should be making great art that will lead you to that, as opposed to thinking about that and working your way backwards.
Yeah. And I think it then can segue back to Peter Weir's Mosquito Coast in the choice of the negative that we used.
Mm-hmm.
Fuji was not a good colour rendition of the greens of the jungle, and that's what he wanted, was a bad rendition of the greens. It also had heavy grain, because back then the negative filmmakers were trying desperately to make a high-speed negative and reduce the grain, and they were working on it. It ended up years later beautiful stuff. But in those early days, it had grain, and that helped, I think, the Mosquito Coast have a reality to it as well. And I think that boldness of Peter's back then in those days was quite refreshing for a major film with say Harrison Ford in it, that would deliberately almost deplete the image to suit the story. And I think in my career that was a big one of the many stepping stones that I went through in that industry, and learning about what are we trying to make. Are we making a drama about a man who takes his family deep into a dirty jungle and tries to tell them this is beautiful? And that's what we're doing. And so you're not going to go to a pretty jungle. I remember doing Gorillas in the Mist just after Mosquito
Oh, it's
Coast
Sigourney Weaver.
with Sigourney, and
Yeah.
oh gosh, she's great. And we tested all the stocks again, and of course, Agfa came good. Agfa was beautiful for that film because the Diane Fossey jungle was beautiful. Everything about it was beautiful, and it should have looked that way, we felt, to the audience. So we chose Agfa, and that had a lovely colour rendition of the jungle, and we tried to make it look as appealing as possible. Whereas Ali Fox's jungle was appealing to him, but to the audience, it needed to look dirty and filthy and dangerous, all the time. So I love those bold decisions by directors, and did love them through the career.
I find it interesting you said that, how he liked the jungle, but the way I look at it, again, that's the beauty of storytelling, is that he made himself believe that he liked it too, even though if he didn't,
Yes,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and I think he was living in self-delusional world, like that character, and he didn't even realize that he was living in that.
yeah,
But what a fantastic movie. And honestly, with the stuff that we talked about today, I wish that there was more stuff on the recent films behind the scenes. I mean, there is, but just more in depth about negative, about storytelling, about all that stuff. So people can learn, because that's all it's about. It's about, learning every single day and moving on and making your own film, the way you want to see it and the audience wants to see it. But
yeah,
thank you
yeah.
so much for joining, John. I appreciate it.
Joe, thank you. Pleasure.
I would love to chat with you more down the road, maybe about Witness or Dead Poet Society or anything else that you prefer. I would be game for that.
Oh, please make contact, and we'll try and make the time zones work a little better. I,
Yeah.
I, com- I completely blew that last time. I really did.
No, no,
We
no.
had
Like
Pete.
I said, it's fine. Don't worry about it. You're living a
Terrific.
part of your life that you're supposed to enjoy, and not doing a lot of interviews. So please do.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, John. Take care.
Take it. Bye.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. And do come back for another episode. Until then, have a great day.